another 30 seconds. I was going to take that about the time he's got later on. We run a tight ship here. Indeed, welcome. And I'm glad, already, I was hoping the family could stay united for the entire 2 days, but already there's a divide because Jody gave a prayer in Hebrew when I was going to start out with "Take me out to the ball game," which is the hymn that our family is most comfortable with, but we'll go on. This is the fourth, that I can count, the fourth gathering of Kriegers. Put up your hand if you were at the Malibu, David's Malibu home for Mulch's 90th birthday in 1975. Tremendous. How many of you were at the Hillsborough home of Evelyn and Charlie in 1958 for the 50th wedding anniversary of Joe and Mulch? Okay, wait, how many were at both those events? How many were in 1958, September 22nd, 1958? Okay, put up your hand. Charlie, I do remember, but you weren't as tall then. And the first one was in Sigarnavold, in Belitz, in the fall of 1923. Would you put up your hand if you were there in 1923? Andrew was the only one who was at all four gatherings, and the next one, we decided this has to happen more often, 2106, and Ed will be hosting that one as well. Who are we? We are the descendants of Solomon and Mindela Leblowitz of Auschwitzium, better, unfortunately, were infamously known as Auschwitz from its later German name. He was the son of a cantor, we don't know his name, likely born before Joseph II declared that all Jews must take a last name so they could serve in the army. He was a learned man whose wife supported him as a fishmonger. Most of us here are direct descendants of his son Moritz, born in 1846, and his younger brother Marcus, who was quite close to among his siblings. And then we are further the descendants, most of us, of the youngest son of Moritz, Joseph, born in 1881. There's also a strong representation here from the Wolfeiler clan, and the Kriegers who descend from Joe and Mulcha are descended from the Wolfeiler clan as well, and welcome Nora, who is really the last relative who has a knowledge of the context of pre-war Europe, and very grateful that she is here, and she's writing her memoir, which I hope one day we'll all be able to read. She's agreed to speak, so I'll put her on the program after Rosalie's talk about the 1931-32 trip that Edith made to Europe, and as an 8-year-old, Nora remembers that trip very well and have some things to say about that. So there are 8 presentations we hope will keep your interest. There's a swimming pool outside, and you still, I think, haven't checked out, so you've got a bedroom if you find it taxing. We have 2 tables with family artifacts over on my right, and please take some time to go up there and look at photographs. The oldest, hard to say which is the oldest item. The picture behind me is the birth certificate of my father's great-grandmother, Babette Altman. She was born in 1815, and that's a document that was written in 1834. But Jody brought with him a talus that has a part that is the talus of Solomon Krieger, born in 1810. Pretty impressive, and it's on display over on the right. That was given to him by his mother, and how that stayed in the family, I don't know, but pretty good. But there's also the family tree, and at each table is a family tree, so you can sort of figure out who's playing as people speak. And what I hope you'll do is, my grandfather made many family trees, and we have a number of various editions floating around. But this is one my daughter Sasha made for my father's 90th birthday in 2007. And I'd like you, please, because it has many of the original inaccuracies of my grandfather, if you could look at it and see whether there are any additions or deletions, we'd like you, please, to have a look at that. Others here, of course, are people who are, I guess, guilty by association. You married into the Krieger family, we'll welcome you, and they're also friends of Kriegers and Wolfeilers. There's one, my Uncle Charles used to use the term, Charlie would say non-blood, not the most fortunate term he ever used, but there's someone here who is not related, but is an adopted member of the family. And Ortrud Newton, who has been a close friend of mine for 35 years. Ortrud really, Jody mentioned he and Milton having a conversation, but Ortrud started, how many years ago? 7? Started translating the letters of Joe and Malcha, written between 1905 and 1908, then went on to translate the letters that Moritz and Hani, Zigga, Heinrich, and Julius, and Michi, the brothers and sisters, wrote when Joe was in America, and the correspondence goes from 1901 until 1920. Wow. And this was a woman who was not educated in the old script, but has re-educated herself, and it's been a labor of love, and did this all the while nursing her husband after stroke, who was a wonderful scholar, and would have, I wish I would have had Ron's insight into what he would have derived from those letters as well. But Gertrude, without you, I don't think this would have happened, and I'm very, very grateful that you're here. Dinner is at 5:30, but we'll adjourn at 5 in order to have a photographic session. And where are we going to do that?
At 4:30.
4:30.
Outside, but
Yeah, whenever the presentation ends. Is that today or tomorrow? Anyway, so the program you have, again, inserting Nora after Rosa's presentation, and I'm going to begin by giving you some little sense of what we have in our possession as the family archive. So the archive is extensive, and my grandfather saved every piece of paper ever owned. I've got the largest collection of Kleenex from 19th century Poland, probably in existence in the world today. And there you see the birth certificate of his grandmother, and I found out recently by reading one of Edith Greenberg's letters that she got this from one of the brothers of Joe in 1931 while visiting Berlin. So this has come, or rather Vienna, this has come into our hands. We have birth certificates on display over there as Moritz and Hani's death certificate, for example. So we've got many vital statistics documents. We have Joe's autobiography. I've made about 15 copies of the autobiography written in 1940, covering the years 1881 with some background until 1906. And so hopefully one will go to each sort of branch of the family you can share among yourselves. We have, again, this 20 years of correspondence between Joe's parents, brothers and sisters, and Joe while he was in Pittsburgh and Washington and Indiana, Pennsylvania, St. Louis, San Francisco, all over North America, working as a waiter, that are wonderful insights into the Krieger family, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. We've got the courtship letters, Joe and Malcha writing every couple of weeks to each other, chronicling a very, very slow-growing but deep affection they had for each other. And I've also have collected for you about 10 pages of excerpts from those letters. And Ortrud and I talked about which excerpts you would enjoy, and I think you'll find it a very, very moving selection of pieces from those letters. We have, now this we haven't had translated yet, but our great-grandmother Hani, that is my great-grandmother, my father's grandmother, some of your great, stop me, great 9 times, grandmother, Hani Zerag, wrote a play, wrote an autobiography, but it's a mystery because when Ortrud translates the letters, she is not a very literate person, and it's certainly not her handwriting. But my grandfather spoke of her love of opera, so we have writing certainly attributed to her, but my grandfather was a great copyist, and she may have been too. We also, by the way, have Joe's poetry, which Ortrud is now translating for us. We have Elsa, and Barry will speak to this later, Elsa Krieger, later Elsa Zimmerspitz, later Elsa Dunner, my father's first cousin, the daughter of Julius Krieger, survived the Shoah on Schindler's List, and we have artifacts from her time which are remarkable in that they survived. We have Edith Greenberg's correspondence. Rose will talk about this. She wrote diligently almost every day during a one-year trip to Europe in 1931-32, and it is all about family, and brilliant and beautiful and very important. We have a lot of photographs, and thanks to those who brought photographs. Hope you do have time to go and see those pictures. We have a lot of family trees, 10 or 12 different versions. I don't know why I didn't appear on any of them, but Joe's art, there's some examples of Joe's art. He was a great copyist, and the oldest piece we have is a piece that came from Edith Greenberg, and it is a drawing he did of monks in 1911. So it's a wonderful piece. And ephemera, bus tickets from Vienna 1908, literally bus tickets, theater tickets. He saved every piece of paper he ever had. And this is Malcha's passport when she married my grandfather in September 1908, a beautiful passport that she came to America on. The ones we know most about, Moritz and Hani, again, son of a fishmonger, born in Oswiecim, and there's lots of reference, although he left there in the 1860s. When my grandparents were married, they published the wedding bands. They had to go back and do that in Oswiecim. He was disowned by his father for straying from orthodoxy, and in fact, the letters reveal there's as many references to Easter and Whitsun as there is to Passover. He's a Jew of the modern world, and yet did go to, there's references having gone certainly to the temple. Hannah Zerag was raised by an uncle, and she had affluent family, and I think they helped out a great deal. But they struggled in their lives. We've learned Moritz is a bit of a gossip. He tends to hang around the cafes. He knows in his letters everybody in town's business, how much they inherited, how much they were fined, who's gone to jail, how much they sold their business for, who they're marrying, and what the dowry was. He is a yenta, basically. Hani is a much more practical, sort of hard-headed woman. She had major health problems, either real or imaginary, and although they lived in great want, supported for the most part, and my grandfather in his biography talks about their having fallen on hard times in 1881. The Altman relatives, the year he was born, the Altmans had set Moritz up in a store that failed, and he then became really a tutor, and they had very difficult times. And Hani's family were helpful in those difficult times. She, despite their poverty, always managed to make sure that either my grandfather or Ziga or Adolf, the brothers, find her enough money to go to a spa and during the winter months so she can restore her health and energy. She also always had a maid, so I thought that's my kind of poverty. And here are the Kriegers about around 1894. And we've gotten to know these people very well from the letters. On the left is Mitchie. Mitchie there was another daughter who died in infancy, but she's the only one who survived. And Mitchie, we believe in 1939, when when Wieglitz is made Judenrein, she goes to stay with relatives named Schneider, who lived in Oświęcim, and my belief is she perished, so we don't have a record. She's a baker's wife, tough customer. She was arrested and almost went to jail for punching her partner, who she was in business with. And Mitchie, one doesn't be judgmental, but the Kriegers struggled. This is pre-social safety net. This is, imagine if you can, oh sorry, you're Americans, a society in which there's no social safety net. And just up we gloat here, we're Canadians, where we look after everybody. And so their social safety net was their children. And so Mitchie was one who Grandpa provided her dowry, Joe provided her dowry, and again, they struggled. They had their landlords in the bakery were the Wolfeilers, and there are many letters complaining that the Wolfeilers were very bad landlords. They charged exorbitant rents, but somebody had to live well in the family, which was good. And then next to that is, let's see, front row is Heinrich. Heinrich was the oldest. My grandfather always described him as a scholar, and he never got established. He's always looking for a position. For a very brief time, he goes and helps his brother Adolf in Berlin, and he starts a store, and it's pretty clear that, in Hamburg rather, and it's pretty clear that they really depended on him. He kept it going, and then the business fell on hard times just before the war, and he ended up going back home. But his is, it's an unhappy lot. He always says to Joe, please write more, and yet he writes nothing to let us know much about him. But my grandfather described him as a very, very well-educated man. And I think of the writing, his is among the most educated.
Unfortunately, he writes very well and says very little.
Yeah, writes well and says little. That's a good description. Then we have in the back row, Adolf, and Adolf is the, do we have Marion Krieger here yet? Marion, welcome. Marion's grandfather, Kevin, greetings. And so this is the grandchildren and of Val Krieger, and he was a salesman. He was always traveling around and was very good to his parents. But he didn't write because he was never at home. So I don't think we have very many lines ever penned by Adolf. But he is one of the boys who helped the family out considerably. And then we've got my grandfather, who most of you knew and remember, and Ziga, who we always thought was named Zygmunt or Siegfried, and even his son, Charles, who we should remember he passed away a year ago, lived in San Francisco, an engineer. Charles thought his father was Siegfried, his father's name was Simon, or Shimon. And He was in America. Julius also came to America. Julius. Actually, we missed out Julius II. Julius was the father of Elsa Dunner. He was the second oldest, born in 1871, and he and Ziga both came to America. And in the correspondence you will see, we've got one of Julius's grandsons and great-grandsons here. Julius, his letters reveal actually a bright and witty person, but he was not well regarded by his siblings, who were more ambitious, I suspect, than he. He came to America, and there's a tale of woe in the letters about they finally sent him home after he had the temerity to borrow $15 from a woman in Philadelphia, or Pittsburgh rather, after they'd already given him all the money they had. So, but Julius is another brother. Julius died in 1931 when Edith was visiting Europe at the time. And so those are my father's aunts and uncles and mom and dad. Joe and Malch are known best to us, and this is their wedding picture from 1908. Malcha, the son of Anton Goldfather, Rosalia Goldman, was just talking to Nora because she's the granddaughter of Rosalia, and what a strong and very bright woman she was. Anton was when I talked to Erna, one of the sisters, she said Anton was just a very outgoing man who liked to sit in cafes and gossip. He also suffered greatly from gout, but his wife was the brains of the operation. And again, the letters you'll read are just very moving, and I'll describe in a minute. My grandfather's worldview is revealed in this, and I won't get into Jody's, which is a more philosophical bit. So what do we see from these letters? Many of the letters deal with whether or not they'll live in America or Europe. And my father insisted, my grandfather had no intention of ever returning to America, to Europe, that he was American through and through. And there's a great letter from 1908, in which I printed an excerpt where Joe talks of himself as an American. He says, "We Americans," and he's been there all of 7 years. And he's trying to explain low-life American culture and how it is without the roots and richness of European culture. But it's so I think you probably want to stay, but that's by no means certain in much of the correspondence. Not certain whether my grandmother will be allowed to leave by her grandfather, by her parents, because my grandmother was the first girl after 6 boys, and they liked her best. I guess I'll steal David's line from Edith's service when David said, "My mother liked me best." Well, there's no doubt Malcha's father liked her best. And so whether they let her go was a question. And of course, when you read this, written in 1905, 1906, it really doesn't matter. When you read that from the perspective of 2010, and you think how fateful that choice was, had they stayed in what was to come in Europe, it's just pretty consequential kind of correspondence. The second thing is becoming American. He talks about jazz, he talks about vaudeville, he reads American literature to try to understand American literature, and at times he pines for the loss of European culture. He's living in a world that doesn't have the cultural depth. On the other hand, he loves America's classlessness. He comes from lower classes, a class that aspired to be upper class but was not economically. He's aware that Europe imposes limits on his potential. And he quickly understands that in the United States, it is not a man's lineage that matters, but his merit. And he quickly seizes on that. And it's evident that he believes that because he seldom stays in a position very long. He's always looking for a better opportunity and another horizon. So the letters reveal who's the character in literature who always overcame the kids' novels in the turn of the century? So Horatio Alger. He's a European transplant, but a Horatio Alger, thank you, Robert, in America. And the other is what the relationship was about. They met in 1905 with Mitchie having introduced them at the bakery. And my grandmother always told the story how she could have had anybody she wants, and somebody had threatened to throw himself under a carriage if he didn't marry her. And I remember her laugh when she told that story. But unlike the other siblings, the letters that we get are really full of talk about dowries. Ziga and Adolf, who married sisters eventually, there's an endless search for a proper match that will bring a proper income. And they go around and meet families, and there's always something wrong, and often a failure to deliver on the expected dowry. In fact, the wedding with Julius's wedding had a shortfall of I think 1,000 kroner, 1,000 marks. It was yes. So the fight broke out at the wedding.
about to turn around and take his son.
Yeah. So it's all about money, all about money. But in fact, the marriage between Joe and Malcha is a love match. And at one point, my grandfather has failed an attempt to go into business where another relative set him up in jewelry business and sold him bad quality merchandise at a high price. And he goes into the mining country of Western Pennsylvania and loses 2/3 of his savings. And he writes back to Malcha saying, look, I said I'd come here and make my fortune, come back home and get you. I have failed. If you want out of the deal. And by the way, when they got engaged, he asked Anton for permission. And he sort of said, well, you can go away, but there's no deal. He said, I don't think he was that impressed with Joe as a match. But she writes back and says, if you think I'm after you for money, you don't know me very well. And it truly was a love match. It begins, as you'll see, with very, very, very formal. An Ortrud in translation always tells us when they're using language which shows the relationship, and as it changes over time, but it's a very, very slow process where they become very close to each other. So that's the archive. It's a tremendous amount, and it's growing, and I hope that those who brought photos will let me take some home tonight, and we can scan them and add them to the collection. So that's just a little bit about the Kriegers, you know, about the letters. And now I'm going to ask my daughter Nina, who's going to come and introduce to you the next speaker, her grandfather.
Thanks, Dad.